When you hear the words work visa, you probably think of paperwork, right? Stacks of forms, long lines. But there's so much more than that. Behind every single one of those applications is a huge economic gamble. We're talking about powerful tools that literally reshape entire industries, fill jobs we desperately need, and completely change people's lives.
Of what we're talking about today. See, this isn't as simple as moving people from point A to point B. It's this incredibly complex system, a real balancing act. And like any high-stakes balancing act, there are going to be winners and there are going to be losers. The big question is, who's who?
So to really get how this all works, we've got to look at who the main players are. You could think of it like this global tug of war, with three key groups all pulling in their own direction.
All right, first up, you've got the governments. And man, are they walking a tightrope. They've got to fill labor shortages to keep the economy humming, right? But they can't let it hurt the wages of their own citizens. Then, of course, you've got the employers. They're just trying to find the workers they need to stay in business. And last, but definitely not least, you have the workers themselves. These are people who are often taking a massive gamble, sometimes with their life savings, leaving everything and everyone they know behind, all for a shot at a better life.
Now, this whole thing isn't just a free-for-all. Not at all. It's actually super structured. So let's dig into the rules of the game. These big international agreements that basically create the official highways for workers to move across borders.
And what's really interesting when you look at this is how different places handle it. So you've got something like the USMCA, that's the agreement between the US, Mexico, and Canada, and it's pretty specific, right? It's for certain professional jobs. But then you look over at Europe, and their freedom of movement deal is, well, it's wide open. It's basically one giant labor market. And then you see the Caribbean with CARICOM doing something similar for their skilled workers, kind of a middle ground.
And you know what? These rules aren't set in stone. They're always changing. Just look at what's happening in the Caribbean. This is a huge shift. They've started a pilot program that opens up free movement for everyone in 4 of the nations, not just the highly skilled folks. That is a really bold experiment, a big deal for that region.
Okay, so we've got the players, we've got the rules. But what does this actually look like on the ground? Let's get into the numbers, because the scale of this is pretty mind-blowing.
Let's kick things off with the US. If you're a skilled tech or science worker trying to get in, the H-1B visa is the golden ticket. And get this, for 2025, there were almost 500,000 registrations. I mean, just let that number sink in for a second. Nearly 500,000 people. It's incredible. But that's only half the story.
Because here comes the reality check. Out of those almost 500,000 applicants, guess how many visas were actually up for grabs? Just 85,000. That gap is massive. It just shows you how fierce the competition is to get one of these spots. We're talking odds of less than 1 in 5.
So because of that crazy competition, the US is shaking things up. Starting in 2026, they're ditching the random lottery system. Instead, they're moving to a new system that's all about the money. It's going to favor applicants with higher salary offers. It's a pretty clear move to stop companies from using the visa for cheaper, lower-wage jobs.
Meanwhile, just north of the border, Canada is hitting the brakes. After years of bringing in more and more temporary workers, they're planning a pretty sharp cut. Just look at these numbers. For 2025, the target is still way up there at over 360,000. But fast forward to 2027, and they want to bring that all the way down to 220,000. That is a major, major change in direction for them.
Now let's hop over to Switzerland. The data there shows they really depend on foreign labor. We're talking almost 1.9 million workers. But the question is, what are they all doing? Well, this chart tells the whole story. A whopping 80% are in the services industry. Factories and farming, much smaller pieces of the pie. And because of those open borders with the EU, most of these workers are just coming from next door.
Okay, so you've got all these people moving around the globe for work. What does that actually do to the economies they're moving to? Let's talk about the ripple effect. You know, what happens to local jobs, to wages, to the whole economic landscape.
So what's the real impact on the economy? Well, it's not a simple answer. It's definitely not one size fits all. It really depends on the skill level of the workers coming in. For example, in Canada, research shows that when you have a lot of low-skilled temporary workers, it can actually push local wages down. But look at Switzerland. The story is completely different. High-skilled immigrants came in and actually raised the wages for high-skilled Swiss workers by 5%. Totally opposite outcomes.
And this is why you have economists like Christopher Wurzwick raising the alarm. He basically says that using temporary foreign labor as like a crutch, it lets businesses off the hook from doing what they should be doing, actually raising wages and making jobs better to attract local workers.
And sometimes the problem is baked right into the rules. Take the TN visa for professionals from Mexico and Canada. On the one hand, there's no limit on how many can come in, which employers love. But here's the catch. There's no minimum wage rule. And that has a lot of people worried that it's a loophole being used to pay people less than their American counterparts.
All right, we've talked a lot about numbers and economics, but behind all that data, there's a really deep human story. So let's shift gears now and talk about the people at the center of all this, the workers. What's the impact on their rights, their families, and what their future looks like?
You know, the International Labor Organization is crystal clear on this point. They say any labor agreement has to be built on a foundation of human rights and labor standards, period. The goal is to make sure everything is fair and safe for these workers. That's the ideal, right? But what's really happening out there?
Yeah, the reality can be pretty brutal. You hear these horror stories, workers from Ghana going to the Gulf states and having their passports taken away, their wages just straight up stolen. And even when governments try to help, it doesn't always work. Look at Israel. They set up a system to lower recruitment fees, which is good, but it did absolutely nothing to fix the bad pay and terrible working conditions. And that's exactly why you see unions in places like the Caribbean pushing so hard for better rules to stop this race to the bottom that hurts everybody.
And then there's the cost to the family. And this one is really tough. Most of these temporary visas, they're just for the worker. That's it. Spouses and kids have to stay behind. It creates this situation where parents are gone for years, watching their kids grow up over a phone screen. Their only connection is a voice and the money they send back home.
This all leads us to a really important term, the non-immigrant visa. The key is right there in the name, non-immigrant. It means you are not there to stay. The whole point of the visa is that you are there temporarily, and you have to prove that you plan on going home. It seems like a small distinction, but it has huge consequences for whether someone can ever truly build a life in that new country.
And this is where you really see what you could call the skill divide. It's stark. If you're a high-skilled worker in the U.S. on an H-1B visa, yeah, there's a path to a green card. It's not easy, it's long and complicated, but it exists. But if you're a low-skilled farm worker on an H-2A visa, that path is a dead end. It's just not there. The system is literally designed for you to come, do the work, pay your taxes, and then leave.
So it all comes down to this really tough question, doesn't it? Are these temporary worker programs just a smart, flexible way to fill gaps in the economy, or are we creating a permanent problem, a whole class of people who live and work alongside us, but with only temporary rights? That's the fundamental trade-off, and it's right at the heart of the global economy we live in today.